and welcome to the Podium Pod, the podcast covering the 2023 FIBA World Cup across Indonesia, Japan, and the Philippines. Brought to you by the Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. We're also brought to you by FBL, Fantasy Ballers League, an Australian baller lifestyle brand that aims to provide you with classics on and off the court. FBL makes a bold statement in its distinctive white, black, and gold colours, with products ranging from basketball shoes to apparel, accessories, and more. Be bold with gold. Check out the FBL Collective at fblsport.com today. And finally, don't miss out on the Boomers versus the World Games this week as the Australian Boomers play a series of warm-up games in Melbourne in preparation for the upcoming FIBA 2023 World Cup. These games are live and free on the 9 Network and 9 Now. I'm Adam Webster, joined once again by my Clutch Radio compadre, Jacob Duell. Jacob, we had our very first Boomers warm-up game in Melbourne last night. It was fair to say it was a bloodbath over Venezuela, a 56-point victory. We'll talk about that. And there's also been some action around the world as other key teams warm up for this 2023 FIBA World Cup.
There's been plenty happening, hasn't there? And as morbid as it might sound, a Boomers win like that, a bloodbath like that, as you say, really starts to get you excited for the upcoming World Cup and thinking about what could be possible in about a month's time.
Well, as we said, a 56-point victory to the Boomers, 97 played 41. If you want to isolate the second and third quarters where the Boomers really locked in, Venezuela scored 11 points. The Boomers scored 48 across those two periods. The last quarter was kind of a write-off for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the team were a little bit rattled by Chris Goulding's apparent knee injury. And secondly, Venezuela just started to hit a couple of shots and the Boomers were pretty sloppy. Sloppy was kind of a theme across the whole game, I want to say, Jacob, and it was very much a typical exhibition warm-up game for a tournament because, you know, whilst the Boomers were dominant in on the scoreboard, they did turn the ball over a lot and they were really, really sloppy. 19 turnovers. I mean, Brian Goorjian has nothing to worry about after this game, but it certainly gives him a lot to focus on.
That'd be the one concern for him, wouldn't it? And as you say, it was what you'd expect from a first hit out for a team like this. The turnovers were, you know, one player cutting and the pass goes to where he was, or just a couple of little misconnections in the pick and roll. And they're things that'll tidy up with a little bit more familiarity. And we know that a lot of this Boomers group has that familiarity already. But when you're adding in someone like Josh Giddey as a focal point, there's still going to be some teething issues. So, as you say, no real concerns out of this game. It's hard to be upset when you win by more than 50 points, but I'm sure Brian Goorjian would have some of those little mistakes penciled into the film session that followed.
We've got to talk about Josh Giddey. I mean, he led the team, of course, the entire game, finished with 14 points on 5 of 7 shooting, 8 rebounds, 9 assists. Commentators wanted him to stay in for a triple-double. I thought there was zero chance of that happening in the last term. He had 6 turnovers, but a lot of those were exactly as you say. He was sort of passing to where he thought the guy would be. The guy wasn't there, and it was a little bit sloppy. But overall, Josh Giddey kind of stamped himself as the leader of this team on the court. Everything went through him.
Brian Goorjian said that would be the case, didn't he, in the lead into these games? He's been very open in saying that Josh Giddey is the future of this team, and he's going to be a focal point from right now. And we saw that on the court against Venezuela. And with how good the start to his NBA career has been, there was no reason to expect him to show any nerves or to be timid or to not attack. But it was just great to see him being so aggressive from the outset, driving hard, making those passes, getting a few buckets for himself. It really just did feel like a perfect, not debut, but a perfect return to the big stage for Australia for Josh Giddey.
And he had a really good dance partner in Duop Reath starting at centre as well. He was 12 of 14 from the field for 26 points in definitely his best game for the Boomers, I think, for his career, and one of the most impressive games you've seen him in international play. I mean, he was just rolling everywhere. He was catching everything Giddey was throwing his way, and he was just able to convert time and time and time again. He was too big and too strong for the Venezuelan team, which stands him in really good stead to be the backup 5 for this team throughout this upcoming tournament.
Yeah, and you see a lot of comments on the socials and elsewhere that, Josh Giddey's made him look good. He's got all those points. Well, you still have to cut at the right time to the right place. You still got to make the catch. you still got to finish. So Duop Reath was fantastic, and that's a role partnering Josh Giddey that you could see him playing at the World Cup and doing really well. So I, in my head, already had him locked in as that backup five. I think any doubt that anyone had really should have been put to bed by now. He was everything that anyone could have hoped for, I think.
I want to talk about Xavier Cooks's game. He played a lot of backup five himself for this squad, just simply due to lack of size with Jock Landale missing the game through that knee injury. There is a chance that Jock comes back for one of the last two games, Gorge said in the post-match press conference. But Cooks seemed to be really struggling to catch the ball in the right spots throughout the game. The ball was kind of zipping through his hands early on. He kind of put it together a little bit later in the piece, but he finished with 5 points, 5 boards, 2 assists, 1 steal, and the bright spot for him was 4 blocks. He had a really good game defensively, as did this whole team. They really locked down the Venezuelans. But Cooks is going to have to get his sea legs under him and be able to catch these balls across these last 2 games, because he's one of those guys that's kind of on the bubble for this squad. So he's going to have to be really clean across the last couple of games and convert a lot more as backup five, particularly given he won't get many more chances to impress.
And you're right about him maybe being on the edge of selection. We've spoken a lot about he and Jack White both sitting in a similar boat in that regard. And you could see some of the things that would give Cooks an edge in that battle. The playmaking that he brings, some of the little kick out passes off the short roll that he made. There were some nice moments there, but you're right that there was a lot of stuff to tidy up. Defensively, you know what you're going to get from him, and you can see the upside offensively, but it's just, as you say, getting the legs under him, maybe eliminating some of the nerves that might have been there, and finding his feet quickly, because there is only 2 more games to impress.
And one of the things that you need when you're going a little small, whether it be by injury or by necessity, is you need really good rebounders at the other positions. And Jack White having 8, along with Giddey's 8, I mean, that's exactly what you need when you have Jock as your center and Duop Reath as your backup. Not that they can't get boards themselves, but you need guys to contribute, and you need strong rebounders. And Jack White's always been a really strong rebounder and defender. So, that coupled with his potential to stretch the floor makes him a really interesting prospect for this squad too.
I find it bizarre that Jack White had a torn Achilles not that long ago.
Yeah.
He just he just floats in the air. He gets up so easily for those rebounds, and he's really strong as well. He doesn't let anyone rip it away from him. So you're right that that's a real strength of his. And Xavier Cook's a good rebounder in his own right, but geez, Jack White makes it look pretty easy when the ball's there to be won. And I really love the fact as well that in the last minute of a blowout exhibition game, he's still throwing himself on the floor, chasing after loose balls at every opportunity. It's something that I think is impressive across this whole Boomers team, that willingness to always work, but he in particular sort of personifies that. So I think even though it wasn't the flashiest game, I think he did put forward a pretty good case for himself.
And we have to talk about Chris Goulding. He came off in the second half after what looked like a knock to the knee. He was cleared of serious injury, but he was icing that knee on the bench toward the end of the game. And, we've spoken about on this show the need to have a shooter, a knockdown shooter on this squad for Giddey to be able to use as an outlet. And Goulding going down and potentially missing the World Cup, it had everyone's hearts in their mouths for a period of time, because you got to take him over to Japan, right?
I think you do, unless this injury really is something that's going to wipe him out for a long period of time. He just is that point of difference that on this squad. And again, you see the commentary on social media that he's sort of the outlier talent-wise in this team, and I'm not even necessarily going to disagree with that, as good as I think Chris Goulding is, but he's the only player of his type there, and it's an important type of player to have. As you say, you need that shooting to space the floor around everyone else. And Brian Goorjian recognizes that. He specifically has mentioned Chris Goulding in the lead into this tournament as the type of player that needs to be on the floor with Josh Giddey. So it's a scary injury for the Boomers, I think, even if some people might disagree. And if they lose Chris Goulding, it is going to cause a restructure of this roster positionally to maybe what would have been ideal.
So the Boomers take care of Venezuela really easily in their first game. They will now turn to their second of 3 warm-up games. They play Brazil tomorrow evening. That game's been moved back to 5:30 to account for the Matildas semi-final in the FIFA Women's World Cup, which I think we can all say was a brilliant decision on the part of Basketball Australia and the Boomers, Jacob, because I was going to find it very, very difficult to watch both at the same time, and the Boomers would have been on the small screen, not the big one.
I was about to say, I think I would have been in the same boat. If the Boomers were on at all, they wouldn't have been taking up the most space on my TV, which feels blasphemous to say that the Boomers wouldn't be my number one priority. But this is a rare occasion where I think we could get away with that. So a good outcome for both of us and for a lot of people, I think.
And lessons learned. I mean, we obviously had the FIBA Women's World Cup in Australia last year in Sydney. How huge would a FIBA Men's World Cup be in Australia? I mean, it's got to be a dream of ours to be able to potentially cover a tournament like that, to be able to commentate in a tournament like that is the stuff of your future goal board's dreams. But you know, between that and the Brisbane Olympics, more international basketball in Australia, please, because Australians demand it. And even though we're both card-carrying Tasmanians, I have to add more international basketball in Tasmania because the arena will be full and it will be loud and the fans will appreciate it. So Basketball Australia, if you're listening, after this tournament is done and won, can we please get a qualifying game down at MyState Bank Arena in Hobart? Because that's a very selfish request from Jacob and myself, but I'm happy to make it on this show. So we'll turn our attention to some other games that occurred over the last couple of days. The other game that was played at Rod Laver Arena last night was Brazil defeating South Sudan 85-75. Just going to give you the soapbox for Marcelo Huertas here because he scored 8 points and had 9 assists. So he wound back the clock for you. I know you're a big, big fan, Jacob.
I am. It's been a while since I've really been able to see him in action, but going back to his Lakers days, I was dangerously close to buying a Marcelo Huertas jersey when I was in Los Angeles. Ended up landing on the Robert Sacre, but two very good options. And it's really good to see him still out here on the floor in international basketball playing well and really running the show for a Brazil team that, as you say, accounted for South Sudan and I think has the potential to maybe surprise some people at the World Cup. So there's a little bit to like there, isn't there, with this Brazilian team?
And speaking of surprise, you know, NBL champion Tim Suarez topped the scoreboard for the Brazilians with 15 points. He didn't miss from the field. And we saw a bit of that for Sydney from time to time, but he looked like a real beast against South Sudan, and he might be a bit of a game changer for Brazil in this World Cup.
Yeah, and as you say, we saw bits of that in the NBL. There'd be games where he'd be knocking it down from the perimeter. Then there'd be a game where he'd score around the basket a bit. There'd be some good defensive moments. But it is nice to see that full package coming together on such a big stage here for his national team. So whether he's a bit of a Paddy Mills who really steps up for his country, I hope so, because I really like Tim Suarez and I like the things that he can do. And if he's going to knock down 6 of 6 from the field and a few triples, this team could go to another level.
Absolutely. For South Sudan, they were paced by Wendy Gabriel, who, of course, has spent some time in the NBA, and they also had contributions from a few NBL players, Sunday Deck, Junior Madut, Mango Mathiang, and Denga Kuth also off the bench. So, you know, we said it in the previews, it's really nice to see a bunch of well-known NBL players getting an opportunity on a team that is not Australia or New Zealand in a World Cup.
It is, and I think this team will be really fun to watch as well. The way that they're built, they've taken it up to a talented Brazilian team and probably a Brazilian team that's spent a lot more time playing together. So I think these warm-up games will be good for South Sudan in the lead-in. And a lot of those NBL players you've mentioned, they are role players in the NBL. They have a niche that they fill, and that's a role that they can also fill around some really high level talent, around Wendy and Gabriel and around Omot on this team. They can complement each other really nicely. And I think even though they went down by 10 points, this had the makings of a really promising lead in and a really promising tournament for South Sudan.
If they can hit shots from outside, watch out. They were 4 of 28 from the outside, so 14%. If they can get that up close to 30%, they win this game. I think is probably the call out. So there's not a lot of difference between South Sudan and a team like Brazil at this stage. I hope that they maintain at least that sort of difference or can close the gap a little bit on those upper sides, because I'd really like to see them make a run at that second round of competition in the FIBA World Cup. Turning to a couple of teams with some real superstars of the FIBA game, Canada defeated Germany by 1 point. They needed overtime to get there. And, there were NBA players all over the place. Dennis Schroeder was the captain of Germany. He topped the score sheet with 26 points and 8 assists. Franz Wagner had 18 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists. And then for Canada, they kind of were a three-man band. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, of course, was great. He had 25, 8, and 6. RJ Barrett had 31 points and 5 boards. And Kelly Olynyk chipped in with 21 points of his own. So, no Jamal Murray in this one. But apart from that, Canada were able to defeat Germany, who share a group with Australia, of course, and will be hard to beat. So Canada sort of showing they're picking up the FIBA game quite nicely, which is a little bit scary for the rest of the teams in the comp.
It is. I think that was the hope for a lot of other countries, wasn't it? That Canada would take a little while with this really star-studded group to gel and come together and learn the ropes of FIBA basketball. But credit to them, they seem to be getting the hang of it very quickly, and they do have obviously a huge amount of talent on that roster. And when you look across the box score and you look at this game as a whole, this feels like the kind of game you want to see when FIBA windows open, doesn't it? Just a bunch of really talented guys who maybe don't get that much chance to shine, some of them just doing it all for their countries, putting it all out on the line, shot making, high scoring. This is what you want from the World Cup. So I hope this is an omen for the rest of the tournament, even though for the Boomers' sake, Germany's form is a little bit intimidating.
I maintain that first night of FIBA competition at the World Cup that contains Canada versus France ahead of the first Boomers game of the competition is the most exciting night of action that we will have on the first week. I think we'll just kick off with such a bang. We've got Finland and Australia at 5 p.m. local time in Okinawa, and Canada versus France at 8:30 local time, which they're a couple of hours in front. So be a little earlier, slightly later in the day for us. But I can't be understated how exciting those couple of games back to back will be, particularly that Canada and France game, which will just be ridiculous. Honestly, it'll be ridiculous.
That's two teams that would have every expectation on themselves of challenging for a medal at this tournament.
Right.
So to get a game like that to kick things off, it is exciting, as you say, and could be a preview of what's to come in the later stages. So yeah, it's going to be a tough bar to clear for the rest of the tournament, isn't it? But I'm sure we'll get there.
And finally, a little known minnow of a side called the US beat Spain 98-88. Speaking of scary, we thought that the US would take a little while to gel. They've taken in a really young side. They've then gone and beaten Spain by double digits in an exhibition game. Jacob, how worried are you about this?
I am somewhat worried.
Yeah.
I'm more worried than I wanted to be at this stage of the lead into the tournament. I think, as you say, we all hope the US would take a little while to get going. They're already winning games against some strong opposition, and it's opposition that I thought would be a tough matchup for them. The weakness for this US team is in the front court. They don't have a heap of size. They went up against Willie Hernan Gomez and some other really talented bigs, and they still came out on top. So it's a little bit disconcerting, I think, for a lot of other teams that would have been banking on the US getting bullied around the basket.
Yeah, and speaking of great games, Spain play Canada in just a few days as well, in 2 days, which is really, really exciting. So there's no shortage of great tune-up games in this tournament. And the US have obviously played Slovenia, they've played Spain, so they've had the opportunity to play some of the better sides in the tournament. The Boomers, are you worried at all of the quality of opposition that they have in warm-up games versus the very top sides that are going into this tournament?
I was just thinking, I like the fact that the US and Canada are taking on these really big challenges. They're not shying away from
Yeah.
potentially a loss in the lead in. They're going after the big teams, and the Boomers, there's certainly some quality in these games. I think Venezuela, at least from what we saw, would be the weakest of the four teams. So you hope that there's more challenges to come against Brazil and South Sudan, but it's certainly not on the level of what the US and Canada are facing. So it's a little bit concerning, but I think Australia has enough runs on the board with this group as a whole that they will be able to pull it together regardless and make things work. But it would be nice maybe to have a little bit of a higher level of competition coming in, much like before the Olympics, playing against the US and a very talented Nigerian team. I think that helped.
You just hope that Finland don't come out and punch Australia in the mouth in the first half of that very first game if the competition steps up a notch. So, I'm going to sound like a footy coach now. You can only beat who's in front of you. But at the same time, it's going to step up a big, big notch in about 10 days' time when Finland and Australia face off in Okinawa. So big opportunity for the Boomers to hone themselves and to get ready. But I would imagine that there is no more capable coach than Brian Goorjian to get them ready for what's about to come in group play.
And I think there is a real chance that Finland could come out firing early in that game. We've seen Larry Markkinen is in good form in the warm-up games. He's the kind of player who could just go absolutely crazy for a quarter, a half, a whole game, and put a team on his back. So if the Boomers aren't really prepared and really at their best, there could be a bit of a rude shock early on in that first game. But as you say, if anyone's going to have them ready, it's Brian Goorjian. If any playing group is going to be prepared, it's one including Paddy Mills, Joe Ingles, and the likes. So I think there's still plenty of reason to be optimistic going into that game.
Well, the Podium Pod will be with you throughout the last couple of tune-up games prior to the FIBA 2023 World Cup. Make sure you tune in on the Nine Network for free and Nine Now. We are the Podium Pod. We're brought to you by the Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. Jacob, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me as always. It's starting to get real now, isn't it? And plenty to look forward to.
See you again next time.